was that? What the hell is that? Blue leader to group. Get off the air. Going by at 2 o'clock. What the hell is it?
What was the first fighter jet ever made? How was it even made? And what made it different from what came before? World War II changed the face of war in many ways. One of the biggest leaps wasn't tanks or ships. It was the skies. Imagine a plane so fast that propellers couldn't keep up, a plane using jet engines. This is the story of the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Why it was revolutionary, what held it back, and what legacy it left behind. In 1938 to 1939, Messerschmitt began work on a project called Projekt 1065. This was the design that would become the Me-262. The jet did experience some problems initially. The reason why it experienced problems initially was because the jet engines were new. Materials that could handle high heat and stress were rare. Metallurgy and manufacturing were tricky. The first flight of the airframe, without real jet engines, was done in April 1941 using piston engines, because the actual jet engines weren't ready. First flight with jet engines was on August 18, 1942, using two Junkers Jumo 004 turbojets. Twin-engine swept wings, slight sweep. It was more advanced aerodynamically than many piston-prop aircraft of the time. Armament was heavy, typically 430mm cannons, Mk-108, and in some versions bombs or rockets. Two main versions, as an interceptor fighter, Schwalbe, Leithaber Swallow, and as a fighter bomber or light bomber, Sturmvogel, Liga Stormbird. Its speed could reach roughly 540 miles per hour, depending on variant altitude. This was much faster than most Allied propeller-driven fighters. Its ceiling and range were decent. It could fly high and had a useful combat radius. But it wasn't perfect. Fuel availability, engine reliability, maintenance were all big issues. The Jumo 004 engines were revolutionary but fragile. High temperatures, metal fatigue, lack of heat-resistant alloys meant they often failed or needed frequent maintenance. Germany late in the war was suffering shortages, fuel, raw materials, trained pilots. This limited how many Me-262s could actually fly and fight. The Me-262 was introduced in combat in mid-1944, April or so. While its speed and firepower made it very dangerous to Allied bombers, it was vulnerable in certain phases, especially takeoff and landing, when the jet engines needed time to spool up and were exposed. Allied fighters and bombers targeted Me-262s on the ground or close to airfields. In total, about 1,400 Me-262s were built overall. But far fewer saw combat. Estimates are that around 300 were operational in combat roles. Now, why didn't it change the war's outcome? Well, the Me-262 arrived too late. By the time it was in service in force, Germany was already being stretched on many fronts. Allied air superiority, supply issues, fuel shortages meant even when the aircraft existed, it was hard to use it well. Pilots needed time to transition to jet flying. The speeds, handling, and things like engine spooling meant that mistakes could be deadly. Many pilots had limited experience. Spare parts, maintenance, and fuel were major problems. Also, the factories producing Me-262s were bombed by the Allies. Reliability of engines meant often they failed in flight or had short lifespans. Even though the Me-262 didn't turn the tide of World War II, its design influenced post-war aviation heavily. Engineers from both the Allied and Soviet sides studied captured Me-262s. Some features like the swept wings, heavy nose armament, and jet engine configuration fed into new jet fighters. The Gloucester Meteor, the British jet fighter, also entered service around the same time and was one of the first among the Allies to fly jets in combat. But the Me-262 had performance that many propeller fighters couldn't match. Modern replicas and new builds, with safer, more reliable engines, exist to help preserve its history and allow people to see, and sometimes hear, what flying one might have been like. Other early jets included the British Gloucester Meteor, the German Heinkel He-280, and later, aircraft like the US Lockheed P-80. But what sets Me-262 apart is that it was the first to fully combine operational deployment and jet engines. The Gloucester Meteor was Britain's first operational jet fighter, which entered service mid-1944. It is less advanced in some respects than the Me-262, but more reliable in many cases. Me-280, Germany's earlier experimental jet fighter. Flew with jets, but didn't reach the same levels of production or combat deployment. Lockheed P-80. Shooting Star, which was in the United States, came a bit later, saw wider use after the war. Good for comparison to show how jet tech evolved in the US. Pilots who flew the Me-262 described its speed as nothing like they had experienced, catching enemy bombers off guard, then sometimes having to deal with engines that wouldn't respond quickly. The Me-262 wasn't just another plane, it was a major turning point in history. It proved what jet power could really do in the skies. When it first appeared, it was like nothing else. Suddenly, air forces around the world had to rethink everything: how fast planes should be, how they should be armed, and even how they were shaped. The Me-262 forced everyone to accept that the age of propellers was ending and the age of jets was here. Think of it like a bridge. On one side, you had the old piston engine fighters like the Spitfire, Mustang, and Messerschmitt Bf-109. On the other side, you had modern jet fighters like the F-86 Sabre or MiG-15. The Me-262 stood right in the middle. Without it, and without the lessons it gave, those later jets might have come years later or looked very different. But here's the other lesson the Me-262 teaches us. New technology by itself isn't enough to win. The jet was faster and more powerful than almost anything in the sky, but it wasn't reliable. Its engines wore out quickly, spare parts were hard to get, and Germany didn't have the fuel or factories to keep them flying in large numbers. On top of that, pilots needed special training to handle the jump in speed and performance. Many didn't have the time or resources to learn properly. Even with all its strengths, the Me-262 couldn't carry the war on its own. It was up against overwhelming numbers, organized supply chains, and a clear Allied strategy. That's why it serves as a reminder. Technology is only one part of the equation. Without the support system behind it, fuel, training, and leadership, even the most advanced aircraft in the world can fall short. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to see more videos like this, and consider checking out some of my other videos as well.